My name is Jim Walker. I am Special Events Coordinator for the Lake County Peace Officers Association. I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. The LCPOA, Lake County Peace Officers Association, is a fraternal organization. Our members are comprised of Lake County public safety agencies, sworn peace officers, firefighters, officers of the court, non-sworn support personnel, and civilian volunteers. We have one thing in common: we're all dedicated to serving the residents of Lake County. The LCPOA provides scholarships for graduating seniors who wish to pursue a career in public safety, and we support many youth and community activities. The POA is hosting this debate of candidates for Lake County Sheriff as a service to the community of Lake County. The debate will consist of questions submitted by the community and selected by the moderator. Our moderator this evening is Mr. Mark Brannigan. He's Public Works Director for the City of Lakeport. Our timekeeper this evening is Ms. Wendy Monfrance. And with that, I'm done. We're going to turn the debate over to Mark.
Okay, thank you. Could the candidates please come out? I would first like to explain how the selection process was determined. Just before we began this event at 5:45, we met in the back and we had a random roll of dice to figure out who goes first, second, and third, and for the podium selection. So we want to make sure that everything's as fair as we can make it. And what I'm going to do here is quickly run over what the rules are. We've also, when we met in the back, we talked about the rules. So I want to share the rules. The first rule is that we have time limits. We have a lot of great questions that were submitted, a lot more than what we'll be able to get to tonight. There's just not as much time as we'd hope. So we have a 3-minute time limit for each question, meaning we'll ask a question. Each candidate has 3 minutes to answer the question. After each candidate answers, if anyone has a rebuttal to the question, they have 1.5 minutes to state the rebuttal. In an effort to address as many questions as possible, I may end the rebuttal so that we can move on and answer as many questions as possible. Another rule was to not interrupt. We want to make sure that each candidate is able to give their point of view as clearly as possible. So that means if somebody wants to rebut it, they're going to raise a green card. We'll make note of who that person is, and we'll come back around and allow that person to have the rebuttal, but no interruptions. And the last rule is that the question that is going to be asked, we want each candidate to stick to make sure they answer the question. We don't want to go off on a different issue, even though it may be important. We want to stick to the question being asked. So if I may ask clarification as to how it relates to the question. So those are the rules, and without holding this up, I'm going to get started with starting with a bio of our first candidate, which is Bob. I'm referring to our candidate Bob Chalk as Bob. And Bob was born and raised in Lake County and grew up on the family ranch in Kelseyville. Bob and his wife, Marcia, raised 3 children and have 13 grandchildren. Bob began his 32-year law enforcement career with Lake County Sheriff's Department. Bob was recruited to join the Clear Lake Police Department in 1981, where he remained for the next 25 years. Bob began as a patrol officer, promoting through the ranks, spending 14 years as a chief of police. Bob is a graduate of the FBI National Academy in Quintico? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, thank you. Virginia, and holds the highest training certificate issued by the state of California. And with that, I would like to go ahead and turn it over to Bob to do an introduction, a 3-minute introduction.
Well, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Lake County Peace Officers Association. And importantly, thank you to the public. You have a great concern coming up in the next election, and that's why you're here. I also want to thank my wife and my mother for being here tonight. I'm Bob Chalk. I was a police chief in Clear Lake for 14 years. Many of you know that. I spent 32 years of law enforcement in Lake County. I'm proud of many accomplishments during that time. As a police chief in Clear Lake, we were able to cut the crime by 65%. Yes, 65%. Was also recognized by the Attorney General for that drastic reduction in crime. I did not do that myself. I had many diligent employees that worked hard day and night to achieve that accomplishment. And we need to acknowledge the work of the men and women that perform law enforcement in our county day in and day out. I'd like to be your next sheriff because I will bring new and innovative ideas from outside the department. Yes, it has been many, many years, close to 40 years, before you elected a sheriff that came from outside the department. This is a distinct opportunity that you would have. I bring ideas, new and innovative ideas from outside the sheriff's department. I want to share those ideas with the people in Lake County. It is very important for each of you to listen to all three of us candidates and choose who you feel is going to lead your department in the best direction for the future of Lake County. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next we have Brian Martin, who is going to be referred to as Brian. Brian Martin has served in law enforcement since 1992 as a military police soldier, police officer, corporal, deputy sheriff, sergeant, lieutenant, a Department of Justice special agent, and the assistant chief of probation. Brian Martin has a Bachelor's of Science degree in public administration with over 1,900 hours of formalized training. His wife, Crystal, is a dedicated advocate for victims' rights in Lake County, and their 3 children are involved in all sports of community activity. Brian's leadership abilities and innovative ideas will restore confidence in cooperation to the Office of Sheriff Coroner. And if we can get your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mark. I want to echo Mr. Chalk's thank you to the members of the public who have taken time out of your very busy schedules, I'm sure, to come listen to the 3 of us speak. And I also want to thank all of our spouses, Marcia and as well as my wife, Crystal, both dedicate a lot of time and energy in supporting us. And I know I will speak for Bob on this and say that we couldn't do this without the help of our families. And again, thank you, and I love you, Crystal. I feel like you will find that I am the candidate with the knowledge, skills, and ability, the experience, education, and training that's going to be required to get this very tough task of running the Sheriff's Department and bringing it to a level that we expect here in Lake County. Growing up in Lake County, I graduated from high school in 1989, and whenever I would leave Lake County and tell people, yeah, that's where I'm from, they had 2 responses. Where's that? Or we go vacation there. Now the responses that we get are, ooh, the people cringe a little bit, and I'm really tired and embarrassed, and I know we can do better. Those of us that choose to live, work, and vacation in Lake County know what a great, beautiful place this is, know what great people we have here, and it's time that we got somebody in a position in law enforcement to accurately reflect the values that people have in this community. My experience, as Mark said, I started my law enforcement career over 20 years ago by enlisting in the United States Army as a military police soldier. I constantly sought out opportunities for self-improvement, opportunities for increased responsibility, and opportunities for training. I promoted through the ranks to the rank of sergeant. I was a paratrooper. I led a special reaction team at the Fort Bragg, North Carolina, United States Army military installation. And from there, I went on to join the Pismo Beach Police Department. I promoted through the ranks there to corporal. I served as a training officer where I was responsible for training newly hired officers. I served as a crime scene investigator, a traffic accident investigator, and I participated on the multi-agency San Luis Obispo County SWAT team. I was recognized by Mothers Against Drunk Driving during their 20-year anniversary for my outstanding efforts in DUI enforcement, and I was also a member of the San Luis Obispo County DUI Task Force. I applied for a job as a deputy sheriff here in Lake County. We started raising a family and realized this is where we want to call home and raise our family here. In 2005, I was hired as a deputy sheriff and again promoted through the ranks to the rank of sergeant. In 2008, I had a great opportunity to go work for the Department of Justice as a special agent, where I got to work with some of the finest law enforcement officers in our state and to work cooperatively and collaboratively on gang issues, on narcotics trafficking issues. And I'd like to close by saying, I see I'm getting close to the end of my time. As far as my training and education goes, I have a Bachelor of Science in Public Administration with a concentration in criminal justice. It took me over 20 years to get that degree, but in 2011 I finally buckled down and finished up earning that degree, and I think it's a very applicable accent.
Okay, and Sheriff Rivero started his career in law enforcement in 1984 at Hunters Point and graduated #1 at the academy. Sheriff Rivero worked for other districts in San Francisco and worked a private business for many years. Sheriff Rivero began working for the Lake County Sheriff's Office in 2007, graduated post-basic, intermediate, and advanced executive training, and is currently the sheriff for Lake County. And if you could give your opening statement, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. This is a very important election and a very important choice that you're going to make here very shortly on June 3rd. The choice is whether to return back to the way the law enforcement, the sheriff's office was being run and handled, or to continue forward with the progress that I have accomplished through my leadership with the help of the many good men and women of the Lake County Sheriff's Office. Some of what I believe to be the most important issues that I want to bring out tonight are the fact that I have never turned my back on the public. What I have done, in fact, has caused some controversy, and what I have done has been difficult, but I've continued to fight and never, ever stopped. I've always put the public's interest in front of joining the club that for decades has run this county. I think we've made a lot of progress in that direction, and I know we've made a lot of progress in the sheriff's office, the way the officers conduct themselves, the types of investigations that they do, the multitude of multifaceted arrests that they make, and their attitude towards you, the public. They understand we work for you, you don't work for us. We respond to your concerns. During my time there, through my leadership, the sheriff's office has accountability. They're accountable to you. We do surveys now. We survey a third of the public contacts that we have to make sure that the people are satisfied with our services, and in fact they are. Far and away, I get positive feedback from you, the public, and that's what I'm looking for your satisfaction in what we do day in and day out. We've had fiscal accountability. That's enormously important, because you can say you can do things, but can you really if you were restricted by the fiscal constraints that the county has had and the money not being there? We've had modernization of the sheriff's office. We've built a new evidence room. We have upgraded the jail tremendously. You could speak to anybody from the Lake County Civil Grand Jury. They will give you a 5-star review of the jail, and believe you me, it didn't have 1 star when I took over. We've instituted sex registrant checks, parolee checks, and probation checks on a regular basis to make sure that you, the public, and your children and your spouses are safe and remain safe. And we've increased arrests of violent criminals. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the first question goes to Brian. In your view, what are the biggest issues facing the Sheriff's Department at this time?
It's clear to me that the biggest issues facing the Sheriff's Department this time are the damaged relationships that have occurred between the Office of the Sheriff and our many other partners in our community. The relationships between the Sheriff and the District Attorney, the Board of Supervisors, County Council, our various police departments and other community service providers have been damaged, not just during the current sheriff's term, but there's a lot of wounds that go deep. Law enforcement and maintaining law and order in this county is not something that should fall just on the backs of the sheriff's department. I think there's about 55 deputy sheriffs, and if you think that 55 deputy sheriffs are going to maintain law and order in a county of this size without any help and standing on their own, you're sadly mistaken. It takes cooperation and teamwork. It takes a leader in that organization that can reach out and cross bridges and not burn bridges down. It takes a leader who can go out and seek assistance. It takes a leader who can respond to feedback and criticism and look inside and see where there's room for self-improvement and make those changes. I'm that leader. My first order of business is going to be restore those relationships, get some cooperation and collaboration going between our various community service providers, and see that Lake County again is restored to the proper dignity that it deserves.
Okay, it goes next to Bob to answer the question.
Would you repeat the question again, Mark?
Sure. In your view, what are the biggest issues facing the Sheriff's Department at this time?
Number one is safety. Safety for the officers. There's been a lot of issues that have occurred recently in the Sheriff's Office, which I feel are of utmost importance to improve. Brian spoke of some of those, and I agree with some of those. Communication and cooperation is of utmost importance for all law enforcement agencies. You have to work together. In a rural community like we have in Lake County, it is important that each and every law enforcement agency share resources and utilize their personnel with assistance for each of the agencies. Without that, we're going to harm and endanger our officers. We need to establish the credibility and the honesty and pride amongst the employees. Credibility and honesty is what is expected of the sheriff. That has to be set at the top, and that has to run uphill and downhill. The entire department has to have credibility and honesty to restore the faith from the public. And most importantly, we need a very strict policy on drug enforcement. That's the number one cause of crime in Lake County. In my estimation, over 90% of crime is committed because of the drug offenders. That's a primary responsibility for the sheriff, is to provide safety and security for each member in Lake County. Until we do something about the methamphetamine problem, we're going to continue with crime. The crime problem is rampant in Lake County because of the methamphetamine. I spent 32 years in law enforcement. It has gotten far worse than it was when I started. Bring back the countywide drug task force.
Okay, thank you, Bob. And Sheriff Rivera.
For me, the highest priority in moving forward in the next 4 years will be recruitment and retention. When I joined the Sheriff's Office, what I saw there was a revolving door. We were a training ground for other agencies, and we spent a lot of money on it. When the officers were trained and had their basic flow certificate, they looked for jobs elsewhere. And there was a reason for that, and that reason still exists. There has been a 7-year moratorium on cost of living increases for the deputies, for the correctional officers, for my civilian staff, and our support staff. But moreover, that same moratorium applies to each and every county employee here. That needs to stop. The deputy sheriffs, a deputy sheriff 2, at this point in time, from a 12-county survey, is paid $31 less than the mean average in that survey. A sergeant, one of the most important positions that law enforcement has, they are the first line supervisor that are taking care of what the deputies or the officers, if it's a police department, are doing, are 36% below the mean average. Despite my saving over $1 million in my first year in office through fiscal responsibility and going to the CAO or going to the board through the CAO, they have refused to increase the pay so that I can continue to retain and hire the best and the brightest to serve you when you call for our services. That is an outrage, and that is something that I ask every person in this audience to think about, take home with you, and help me with. Help me. Talk to your supervisors. They're recalcitrant about raises. They say there's a Me Too clause. I frankly believe that they are also weaponizing that Me Too clause, and that they do not deal with our employees union on a fair basis. That's my opinion. I've been there. I injected myself into those negotiations, and without these men and women doing the job, everything else that is said here is irrelevant because it won't get done. That's the long and the short of that. Illegal drugs are important because they are the cornerstone for much of the crime in this county. Setting aside AB 109, where your legislators turned loose over 10,000 hardened criminals from the state prison, setting that aside, we have had a problem here with methamphetamine and unmitigated marijuana growing. When I took office here, there was one person that was growing marijuana, one person who was abating the marijuana grow. Now I have more than tripled the amount of narcotics officers.
Okay, thank you. And I did not catch to see if there's any of the rebuttal flags raised at any of these questions. Was there any raised?
There was.
Okay. Sheriff Rivera, go ahead. Minute and a half.
I have a rebuttal for the statements that Mr. Martin just made a few minutes ago concerning the reestablishing of relationships. And there's been much ado made saying, you know, Frank Rivera doesn't get along with anybody. Frank Rivera is constantly battling with different agencies or different departments, that he doesn't cooperate. He's just not a cooperator. That is absolutely false. What Frank Rivera won't do is sell you down the river in order to join a club so that I can be popular with the rest of the groups in Lake County. When the district attorney's office gives a pass to a pedophile and I complain about that and that causes friction between myself and the district attorney, that's not a problem. That's a good thing. That's a positive for you that I am complaining about that. When there are issues at any of the other departments and I won't succumb to the pressure of just go along and get along, that's good for you, the public. That's not a bad thing. So when you hear about these things, please dig a little deeper and think to yourself, if the things that these individuals and the press is included have accused me of, why am I not sitting in San Quentin? Because frankly, some of the most crazy and wild allegations have been made, but realize this, those allegations don't come about doing anything negative to the public or to any of you out there. It's all about not getting along with other entrenched entities in the county. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Would Brian like to respond?
Sure, I would. Yeah, I would. I have a minute and a half also. Probably I'll make it really brief. Again, what you see here is the current sheriff's failure to take responsibility. It's always somebody else's fault. It's the DA's fault. It's the Board of Supervisors' fault. When we talk about recruitment and retention, something that the sheriff does have control over is the morale and the pride and the esprit de corps. And when we talk about morale, I've studied morale my entire law enforcement career from the time that I was in the military, starting over 20 years ago. And you can't pick up a stack of morale and show it to somebody and say which one's greater. What morale is your pride, your willingness, and your ability to be trained and go out and carry out the mission. That's what kept people here for many years despite low pay, and that's the reason that people are leaving, is because they don't have that sense of pride and morale. And people will work for less money if they're treated well and they're respected and they're valued as employees. If they're not, they'll go elsewhere.
Okay, the next question is for Bob. As sheriff, how will you foster an environment that ensures fair treatment of all people that are served by the Lake County Sheriff's Department? Please provide an example.
The primary way that that is done, whether it be in the Lake County Sheriff's Office or any other department, is through the policies and procedures of that agency. There's also programs that can be available for sending officers to that teach the sensitivity training that deals with the different ethnic groups. I believe that a good part of that has to start at the top and go down. The top law enforcement officer has to instill that philosophy from the top down. There has to be training, daily briefings. That has to be stressed to the officers. Most importantly, the officers all need to understand and recognize a person's constitutional right and their civil liberties. Training, training, training is the most valued asset that the sheriff will hand down to the troops in teaching that.
Thank you. The next, Sheriff Rivera.
Thank you. It all boils down to leadership. The people who work for you will follow your lead, and your leadership is what counts. Your expectations, what do you expect from those individuals, and do you properly relay those expectations by displaying them yourself, by communicating them, a clear line of communication? What do we expect you to do? Accountability. You must hold people accountable. If someone makes a mistake, that can be worked with. If somebody does something malicious or out of some untoward intent, then that needs a different response. But it's about how you respond to those issues. I agree with Bob about the training. And in fact, I have increased the training exponentially for the Sheriff's Office. I approve every training I can while still remaining within budget. We talked about daily briefings and about daily training. Well, we do have daily training. I instituted a Lexipol policy that has Lexipol daily training for the officers, and they're required to have that every day. In order to maintain a good relationship with the public, we need to express what that is. What is a good relationship with the public? Let me tell you what I think it is. I think it's about treating with respect as the people who we work for, understanding that relationship, something that's been lost in the word civil service many years ago from what I can see. I think it's about getting out in the community and taking ownership of the community and knowing that we're part of the community. We're ingrained in this community. That was part of my decentralization plan, to have substations so that the officers are placed closer to the community, and in fact that has worked, and it's worked well. And again, the proof of that is in the surveys that we conduct on a regular basis to make sure that the public is being treated right, that the services that they are looking for are being provided, and if they have any questions or concerns, that they can call me. I've made myself directly available to the public. I speak to the public. I often invite them to the office, or I will talk to them on the phone at any time of day or night. I have my phone number available, my cell phone, my personal cell phone number available to the public. I think that's reasonably rare, if not at all. But I think that's the way that I can keep my finger on the pulse and make sure that we are providing the best possible service to each and every one of you every day. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
Mark, would you repeat the question?
Sure. As sheriff, how will you foster an environment that ensures fair treatment of all people that are served by the Lake County Sheriff's Department? Please provide an example.
The level of service that you experience on the street is a direct reflection of the attitude that comes from the top. I've been in law enforcement, as I said, over 20 years, and I'm sure everyone that's out here has at some point encountered a cop who was maybe not so pleasant to them and may have been rude. 99.9% of our officers are out there doing a professional job, 99.9% of the time. It's that every once in a while that you encounter that person who kind of has a chip on their shoulder or an attitude. To me, that attitude comes from the top. This is a culture and an environment in a rank-based organization where there's a sense of self-worth that goes along with promoting up through the ranks. If the person at the top thinks they're the greatest thing ever because they're the person at the top, it works its way down. The next in line person says, well, I might not be as good as that guy, but I'm better than everyone else. By the time it gets down to the line level officer or deputy sheriff, they look around for somebody to think, hey, I must be better than this guy because I'm not better than anybody else I work with because I just started here. I'm the lowest ranking person. That's where that attitude comes from. I want to change that. I'm not that type of person. I'm not the type of person that places a personal self-worth on my position. I view it as a great responsibility, a great privilege to serve in this capacity as a law enforcement officer, and I conduct myself in that manner, and I expect those that work for me to conduct themselves the same. There's been a lot of talk about training and accountability that goes on here. I'm going to tell you what I have done during my career. When I was working for the sheriff as a lieutenant, my management project was an education-based discipline program. And that was every once in a while we had the unpleasant task of having to discipline an employee for some misconduct or some misbehavior of some sort. We can take that opportunity and attempt to squash a person and try to crush them into compliance, but oftentimes that just results in an employee becoming bitter and scorned, and we can take an average, mediocre employee and turn them into a poor employee. Education-based discipline was a program that I introduced where we defer some of that nasty punishment and maybe send them to some training. If a deputy sheriff is rude on the street, they may not realize that what they're doing is perceived as rude. We'll send them to a community or a customer service class. Those programs were accepted by the Deputy Sheriff's Association. However, they were not implemented when I was the training manager at the time. Training in the department, I was responsible for getting our department post-certified, and POST is the Commission on Peace Officer Standards and Training that is responsible for setting the standards our peace officers are required to adhere to. I got our department post-certified in emergency vehicle operations, firearms training, defensive tactics, racial profiling, and tactical communications. To my knowledge, those programs that I implemented and got post-certified are still in place at the Sheriff's Department today. So I'm not going to tell you just what I will do, I'm going to tell you what I have done. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the third question goes to Sheriff Rivero, and we did receive a card that relates to this, so I'm going to try to bring in the card to this question here. The question is, what resources will you use to address the mentally ill population in custody and charged with criminal offenses? And what steps do you plan with AODS mental health?
Well, we have many resources that we already use. We have a contract to provide medical services at the jail, and they are provided, including mental health services. We've also received a grant recently, a $20 million grant to expand the jail, and in our application for the grant, we have a mental health ward included in that. We continue to use Lake County Mental Health as well as using telemedicine and having psychologists and psychiatrists talk to our prisoners, our inmates on a regular basis. The mental health issues sometimes can be a little blurred. It can be confused with drug issues. It can be confused with other issues that make it difficult to identify the individual. But certainly we've taken all precautions for the safety and well-being of each and every one of our prisoners, including our mental health inmates. We sometimes have to separate them or keep them in a safety cell. We do that. We evaluate them upon intake. We let them speak to a nurse if we have any suspicion at all that they have mental health issues or could be suicidal. or could cause a problem within the jail. All of these things are already being implemented, and frankly, I hope to be able to use some grant funding to expand. But again, it's easy to say what you're going to do, but then when you're actually in the chair and you're looking to do that, you have your hopes are tempered by the finances. You have to be realistic. You have to stay within budget. You have to handle the people's money judiciously. And we have provided a tremendous amount of mental health services to our inmates. And by the way, we've also trained our officers on how to deal with mental health patients, how to refer them to the proper agency, Lake County Mental Health on the street. It's an ongoing work, but I believe we've come a long ways and done a terrific job. And I take my hats off to the correctional officers that have been involved in that and the medical staff. Thank you.
Okay, next, Brian.
The sheriff made a mention a little while ago about AB 109 criminal justice realignment. The future of law enforcement shifted in 2011, and along with that shifting came fundings to set up cooperative agreements and cooperation amongst agencies to address issues, not only to punish people while they commit crimes, but to try to find out the reasons that they commit crimes. I think I've heard estimates as high as 70 or 80% of people that are locked up or incarcerated have mental health problems, and clearly that's a key that needs to be addressed. I propose to expand our day reporting center. The probation department now provides a day reporting center. We provide services to offenders, people who are on probation, to alleviate the problems with overcrowding in the jail that we're experiencing here in our county. And my intent is to work as the sheriff with these agencies in conjunction with probation, in conjunction with behavioral health and AODS to provide those services. Let's identify why people are committing crimes. Not everybody's going to be amenable to that. Not everybody's going to come into a program and steer away from a life of crime. But there are people out here that have underlying circumstances that cause them to commit crimes. As a veteran, in my time in the military, I got to experience a lot of things, and every day I see our veterans out on the streets. Not a day goes by where you don't hear about a veteran suffering from PTSD or traumatic brain injury. I worked hard to get the Veterans Court set up, and that is one of the regrets that I have when I left the Sheriff's Department, is that was a project that went unfinished. And I intend to implement Veterans Court here to address issues that affect our veterans population here. There's over 8,000 veterans in this county, and I know that we don't need to thank them by tagging them as criminals when they come back, when they have issues that are going on mentally and physically because they chose to serve our country. I'm the candidate that's going to reach out and create those relationships. And again, it all goes back to what I said at the beginning of this. It's about establishing those relationships and working together, working cooperatively, and working collaboratively to find solutions that benefit us all. Thank you.
I guess I can't just say I agree, right? There's not a whole lot left to say about this. Yeah, I think it's important that the new jail construction is built and designed to accommodate those individuals, and developing the proper policies and procedures to be implemented by the correctional staff. I think it's imperative that those procedures be developed with both the mental health department and AODS, so that the best policies and procedures to accommodate those individuals can be used. With that, you have to move right back to the training issue for the correctional officers. Other than that, I don't have a whole lot I can say that hasn't been said. I agree with them.
Sheriff Rivera?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The next question. Excuse me. Okay, the next question is for Brian. How do you define public safety, and what policies and practices are you planning on implementing to help ensure it?
To me, public safety is all about service, commitment, and dedication. There are those of us that choose to put on a uniform and go out every day and risk our lives so that the rest of you can stay soundly and safe in your home. My public safety, my commitment and dedication and commitment to service started over 20 years ago when I enlisted in the Army, and it's really stuck with me. The policies that I plan on implementing when I take office are to bring about increased technology and increased training. As I said earlier, I'm responsible for implementing the training programs that are still in use at the Sheriff's Department, and I want to expand on those. I want to bring out trainings that draw other agencies into Lake County, where the Lake County Sheriff's Department becomes a provider of training. We have great people here that work at our Sheriff's Department. I see some of them out in the audience, and we have true professionals here. We have an obligation to them to provide them with the training they need to reach their full potential. I want to set up a leadership training program that benefits all law enforcement in our community, and also goes out to benefit the other agencies in our county. This county has a history of promoting people into supervisory positions, into leadership positions, and just kind of let them there to flap in the wind and figure it out on their own. And we figure if you got promoted, you should be able to do the job. We don't provide them with the tools. I want to institute a leadership training program so that when it comes time for me to retire and step down, my leader's ready to take over. The next person is waiting in the wings, ready to take over. Every person at the Sheriff's Department should know their own job very well. They should know the job of the person that directly supervises them, and everybody that works below them should be ready to step into their shoes at any given moment. Thank you.
Okay, Bob?
Public safety is just what it says, it's safety to the public. Public safety is not just for police or the sheriff's office, it also includes the fire departments, which is why it's so important that the policing agencies and the fire departments work together. They are both first responders and provide the safety to the public. Implementing policies and procedures for the Sheriff's Department. I think it's imperative that you provide training that is geared towards the individuals being able to move upward through mobility in the department and promote. That's what brings pride to the employees of the department. You have to provide them with opportunities. Those opportunities have to be held strong. Employees work and strive to achieve the most that they can. It is our obligation as law enforcement managers to provide the opportunity for the employees to advance in their career. When they have an opportunity to advance, they take classes and become far more skilled in the labor of their love. They work for the public, they do a great job, and I would continue to enhance their careers.
Thank you. Sheriff Rivera?
From my perspective, public safety is in the minds of the people who reside within the area that the law enforcement agency is serving. If they feel that they can leave their house safely, that they can return to their house safely, then that they can go shopping or walking or doing whatever it is they enjoy during their life, then the mission of public safety is in fact going in the right direction. From a practical perspective, public safety is really about what the leadership of the agency does to identify where the safety problems are. And some of the tools that we have and that I use to identify those problems are our crime statistics, our reports that are taken, the location where crime has occurred, so that we can target, and the types of crimes, so that we can target those things to try to either abolish them or at least mitigate them so that they don't present a danger to the people of the county. Public safety is about results. It's a bit intangible at times, but it really is about results. And I'd like to take a little bit of this time to give you some of those results. 2010 versus 2012. Before I took office with the previous administration in my second year in office, Methamphetamine sales in 2010, arrests, these are. 2010, 4. Methamphetamine sales in 2012, 31. Methamphetamine possession in 2010, 75, 99 in 2012. Marijuana illegal sales, 11, 17 and 12. Marijuana cultivation, 39 and 10, 79 and 12. Marijuana illegal possession, 27 and 10, 91 and 12. Child sex registration violation terms, 1 in 2010, 12 in 2012. Child molestation cases are being brought, 6 in 2010, 8 in 2012. Elder abuse cases, 8 in 2010, 18 in 2012. These are true results, ladies and gentlemen. When you talk about public safety, you have to look into the minds of the public, but you also have to look at what's being done. These results speak for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is for Bob. If elected sheriff, what are or will you do to resolve the RIMS issue and ensure cooperation between the sheriff's office and other agencies?
Allow access to the other agencies. It's as simple as that. This is not a complicated procedure. I will tell you that we in Clear Lake were the first agency to go computerized in the county. We were the first agency to put the computers in the cars, first agency to put the cameras in the cars. I believe in technology. I believe in sharing technology amongst the agencies. When we first started with the computerization, we had a program that was called LEADS. Later on, the Sheriff's Department got into the computer database system with what was called RIMS. Many of you have heard that before. It's actually sold by Sunridge Systems. Simply a software program for a database. Since we were the first agency that had the computerized system, and the Sheriff's Office got a different one, there was now 2 agencies that did not have the same system in the county. The year before I left, during that year, I felt it was so important that all the law enforcement agencies in the county be able to share in that system and the information that I purchased that RIM system and installed it in Clear Lake Police Department. It is very vital, not only for the safety of the public, most importantly, the safety of the officers, because they have information that is readily available from the other law enforcement agencies, which did not exist without that unity of the systems. We also never had a central warrant system in the county. That RIM system allows for that to be done. Whereas before, as an example, a sheriff's deputy stops an individual on the street and wanted to run a warrant check. There was 3 warrant systems. Clear Lake had their own warrant system, Lakeport Police Department had their own warrant system, and the Sheriff's Office had their own warrant system. That one stop by the deputy would result in the dispatcher having to make 2 other calls to check on a countywide system if that individual had a warrant. Just think if you were a highway patrol officer, their dispatch had to call 3. Very important. Thank you.
Sheriff Rivera?
The RIMS issue, the report management system, is a huge issue. It has historically been abused and weaponized in this county. I'll give you a few examples. Derek Navarro, sexual relationship with a 14-year-old girl. I checked his RIM access when he was a deputy sheriff. He had 11 inquiries into her and her family. That was being weaponized against a victim of sex abuse. the Russell Purdock matter, where you have a chief deputy who runs over an innocent person on a sailboat on a moonless night. Not only is he given the task of overseeing the investigators, because that was never sent out of the sheriff's office, but he admitted in trial that he had accessed the RIM system in order to see what was going on with his own investigation. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask you a question. Do any of you have the right to do that? Because this information is highly sensitive and highly confidential. And there's a two-pronged test that the legislator has set out for that. It's a right to know, which is a law enforcement officer you have, and a need to know, which you have to establish that need, that there is some relevance, that you're doing an investigation, that you're doing something that allows you to have legal access to RIMs. I have canceled RIMs, and until recently, I believed Brian Martin agreed with me, because there was an investigation done concerning the cancellation of RIMs at the DA's office, which is another case of outright abuse where thousands of inquiries were being made in a short period of time. And when the investigator interviewed him, he said he had concerns, grave concerns. And I welcome each and every one of you to look at that investigation. It's on our website. Just click it and then go to the RIMs issue and you can read it for yourself. We still have to check warrants through CPD. I do not have access to CPD's RIM system. I don't have access to LPD's RIM system. What we have is an interoperability agreement which is still in effect, which allows every one of these agencies to check certain information, but does not gives them read-only, does not give them the ability to change that information. For me, that is sufficient at this time. I have talked to Sunridge Systems and asked them to put some type of process in, like there is in CLETS, the state criminal information system, where you have to type in why you are looking at this particular person's record before, so that we have a way to trace that and make sure that it's legitimate. Thank you.
All right.
Quick down and dirty lesson. Records management system, recorded incident management system was what RIM stands for. I was the administrator of that system for a couple years before I left the sheriff's department. I should throw out a couple names here. One name that he neglected to mention is the name of Mike Morshin. And I'm going to tell you, not again what I would do, I'm going to tell you what I did do. Mr. Morshin was implicated in taking the very same records that Mr. Rivero talks about and posting them on the internet to a blog that's run by one of our local groups. I'm the person that was responsible for conducting that investigation and ferreting that information out. Mr. Rivero's allegations are, again, baseless. They're, again, an attempt at him to cast blame against everyone else and not assume responsibility for his own actions. Here's some important dates to keep in mind when we consider when he decided to restrict the RIM's access. It was shortly after there was a bomb threat at Lakeport, at the courthouse, and he failed to notify Lakeport Police Department, and he was criticized by the police chief of Lakeport. March 24th of last year, I announced my candidacy for sheriff. April 17th, I had a letter published in the Record B that was highly critical of the sheriff. April 25th, that's when he decided to cut RIMs off. If you don't think that he was abusing his power and authority at that time for political purposes, you really need to think long and hard about that. RIMs is more about just a report writing system. It does need to be controlled. There are controls and audits available in place. I personally conducted those investigations, ferreted out the people that were abusing it. To me, the information is important, it's powerful. To me, information is like a firearm. If you have a peace officer that's abusing his firearm, misusing that piece of property, you go after that peace officer and you address that individual situation. Just because a peace officer misused their firearm doesn't mean that you would disarm all of our deputy sheriffs and police officers in this county and put them in the precincts. I want to expand the use of RIMs. I feel it's a very valuable tool. And again, it's one of the facets of technology that I want to bring about. We have a component for jail booking, we have a component for report writing and records keeping, and we have a component for dispatching. I want to increase that and bring about what's called RIMs mapping. I want to interface our patrol cars with GPS units so our dispatchers know exactly where every patrol car is at every minute of the day. The supervisors can monitor the activities of their subordinates. We have a big lake here, and supervision tasks are extremely difficult. There were days that I went 3 or 4 days without ever seeing a sergeant, and there's no way to tell who's doing what, who's where, other than by their word. Components of RIMS are available to help us provide increased supervision and increased service to you, the community. Thank you.
Okay, and we have a rebuttal. Oh, excuse me. I'm going to allow the rebuttal from Sheriff Rivera.
With all due respect, the timelines that Mr. Martin just gave you are absolutely false. And they can be proven. They can be proven. They're easily proven. When I just, within the last 6 or 8 months, made the decision to cancel LPD. That decision was made when I was doing a random audit, and I found that one of the LPD officers was accessing his own wife's records and changing his own wife's records. He was also accessing other family members' records. See, here's the problem. Mr. Martin wants to make an analogy here saying, well, it's a firearm, so you don't take the firearm away, but that's a sophistic argument. In other words, it may make sense on the surface, but when you take some time and stop to think about it, it really doesn't make any sense at all. If a peace officer's going around firing off his weapon at people or just firing it off randomly, that's going to come to your attention immediately. It has taken years to uncover the abuse by Navarro, the abuse by Purdock, the same abuse that he criticized. He stands here today telling you that he wants to restore unlimited RIMS access, yet when he was interviewed by an investigator in March or April of 2011, he said exactly the opposite, that he had grave concerns. That is public information that's available on the sheriff's website. Take a look at the investigation, and please do read it for yourself. It tells a different story.
Okay, thank you. Brian, would you like to respond?
It was June of 2011 when you hired the investigators to conduct that investigation. You can look on the internet and view that on his investigative report. As far as me making the comparison of firearms to information, I'm not the one up here using terms like weaponize. He is. And as far as the allegations, March 24th, April 25th, April 17th, those dates are easily researchable on the internet. I say prove it. I say prove it. Just like you made the allegations against the district attorney's office that there was thousands of unlawful and illegal accesses, prove it.
They're in the...
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, the next question is for Sheriff Rivero. In what way will you implement current and available technology advancements to the Lake County Sheriff's Department? And what benefits do you believe it will have on public and officer safety?
I believe that the best current technology that we've brought to the sheriff's office is in-car cameras, and they're already there. They were started under the old administration, but there's only a few of them, and now each and every car has them, and they will continue to have them. They tell an independent story. They both protect you if there's a problem and you don't believe that you were treated properly or you had less than standard service. And they also protect officers against false allegations, frankly. They are tremendous for evidence purposes because nobody's telling you a story, you're watching a video. There's other technology that I would like to implement. We have bought 12 body cameras so far. I think that they are also very useful. The in-car cameras have microphones, but they have a limited distance. So sometimes we can only catch the audio for 50, 100 feet, and sometimes not at all, where the body cameras are right there with the officer, but they're very expensive, and you have to take that into consideration. I recently heard Mr. Martin talking about putting license plate readers. Well, we're very familiar with license plate readers. They use them in SFPD, but they only have a handful of them because they're about $100,000, $150,000 a piece. The entire budget for the sheriff's office is about $20 million, and the bulk of it is for salaries and benefits for our employees. Some of it is for general maintenance of our facilities. Some of it is for car replacement, although we do get a siphon for that. But when you're talking about technology, technology is expensive. We just recently replaced our computers. We have reasonably new computers, but we had to budget for that. And we had to look at it realistically and make sure that we make decisions based on the means that we can live under. We can't overspend. So I'm all for technology, and I'm well familiar with the technologies. There are some terrific advancements. Even the RIM system is an advancement behind when I started, you would write reports on a piece of paper with a pen. And now you can write reports on RIMs and submit them. But again, when you're looking at these, you have to be realistic. I could sit here and rattle off a dozen different modern law enforcement pieces of equipment that are new technology. The question is, can I fit those into the budget and not go over budget? So I have done everything possible to advance the technology, advance the training to be able to use the technology, and move the sheriff's office into the 21st century. Thank you.
Brian?
This is the first I've heard him mention of body cameras. I had brought that up several months ago. The increases in technology I touched on a little bit earlier, bringing about the mapping module and installing GPS units in all the patrol cars to enhance our ability to deliver services and adequately supervise our deputy sheriffs and sergeants that are out on the street. We had let's talk about, I didn't say we were going to put license plate readers out. I mentioned that there have been advances and changes in technology over the last 10, 15, 20 years, and that was one of the examples I gave. I don't think that we have a need for license plate readers here in the county. If we ever do, those resources are available from us or to us from other agencies in the state, the Department of Justice or the FBI. So we do have access to that without having to purchase them. Technology is expensive, but it's worth it. Body cameras, in-car cameras, technology, our ability to respond safely to crime may be expensive, but it saves in the long run. It saves on lawsuits, it saves on excessive force complaints, it saves on a personal level for our deputy sheriffs to know that their story is being told accurately, and it saves you, members of the public, knowing that it's not just your word against whoever might be showing up to answer your call for service, but it's recorded and kept in posterity's sake forever. As far as the cost associated with it, there's been a lot of lawsuits that we as taxpayers have paid. The sheriff talked about saving over $1 million. Well, I don't know why some of that $1 million wasn't used, and maybe even a small portion of that, to bring about some of these advances in technology. I really want to, I believe that the future of law enforcement revolves around technology. We're 15 years behind the times, it seems, always here in Lake County as far as technology goes, and I intend to get us up to speed so that we can deliver professionally and we can be represented in the state of California in a professional manner. Thank you.
Hey, Bob?
I'm kind of saddened when I hear this. The technology at the sheriff's office is so far behind the rest of the world that it is astonishing. And I'm not just going to blame the current sheriff. That technology should have been done years and years ago. I believe most of you know where Clear Lake is, right? Clear Lake is in Lake County. In Clear Lake, as chief, we had the computers in the cars in about year 2000. We're getting close to 14 years ago that was already done. We had the cameras in the cars just shortly after that. When I left in 2006, the end of 2006, I had already installed all the technology into the radios in the cars, so all that was needed was for the big board to be put in dispatch so the dispatch could locate each and every one of those cars where they were. I'm saddened that it never got followed through, but it was being implemented. We were very big on the technology, But we also know that in Lake County, whether it be Lakeport Police, Clear Lake Police, or the Sheriff's Office, the officers and employees are not going to be the highest paid. When you cannot pay the employee the highest and you want to retain them, you give them what they want. The boys want toys. We led that technology field because we couldn't pay them the highest salary, but I could get grants to get that equipment. They liked that. That was their reward. The Sheriff's Office, it's sad, folks. We need to look at getting grants to get that, or it needs to be approved by the Board of Supervisors. What I'm concerned about is that this could all be done for somewhere in the area of $400,000 to $500,000. And I heard that $1 million was given back. It's sad.
Thank you. We have a rebuttal from Sheriff Rivera.
I'll start with the return. We were facing a tremendous budget crunch when I took office, and the CAO came to me along with every other department head and asked us to tighten our belts. I gave him the percentage of I located and gave him the percentage of the budget that he had asked for to bridge the gap so that your schools wouldn't be affected and other services wouldn't be affected. And by the way, I took that out of the fat in the original budget. There was nothing affected. Moving on to the MVTs. In 1984, when I became a San Francisco police officer and I first stepped in a San Francisco police car, there was a mobile video terminal inside that car, 1984. And it wasn't as sophisticated as the ones that we have today, but it certainly helped a lot, and it took a lot of burden off of the dispatchers when we were running plates and running individuals out in the field. I looked into this technology the very first thing when I took office, and it was millions of dollars to bring it into the county, and then it was unreliable because you know what? It depends on cell phone service, and anybody who's ever used a cell phone in Lake County knows what I'm talking about. It is difficult to get a signal in many locations. So I had to look at that from a management perspective and from a value-added perspective. First of all, I have to dedicate millions of dollars, and then I would have to pay the cell phone service, and it may not work. Thank you.
And Bob would like to respond.
Yeah, actually, this is, I think, at the end of it. And like I said in the beginning, this wasn't just all the current sheriff's fault. This should have been done well before and then carried through. And you don't have to rely on the cell phones. They'll actually work off of repeater systems for the radios. Is there any county administrators out here? How about Board of Supervisors? Is there a Board of Supervisors? Oh, I'm not going to hit you hard. The reason I asked if there was any county administrators out here is because I didn't want to get something thrown at me. The first thing you got to learn is sheriff. If you give it back, they'll never give it to you again. And now for the Board of Supervisors. Two of you know how important it is to law enforcement. I think you've seen that in the crowd. You've seen it between the three of us. Please work with the sheriff in this upcoming budget, and let's get the technology to the sheriff's office, and let's save an officer's life.
Okay, the hecklers, huh? Okay. The next question goes to Brian. In what ways have you contributed to the community outside of law enforcement?
Volunteering to me is very important in our community. I didn't get to mention this in my opening speech, but my wife and I have 3 lovely children, And our oldest one is 18 years old. He's getting ready to go off in the Navy at the end of this month. I was in the Army, and I told him after speaking to the Navy recruiters, you should go in the Navy, son. You won't sleep in the dirt, and you'll have a good time. My kids have always grown up involved in sports and community activities. I've dedicated my time to programs that help them. I've coached youth sports, football, basketball, soccer, and baseball. I've also volunteered to help when my oldest son was in Boy Scouts on scouting trips. I volunteer with Relay for Life. Cancer has affected my family, as it has affected so many people in our community, and I've participated in Relay for Life organizations over the last several years. I volunteered my time to help build the county's multidisciplinary interview center. This is a center that was built for the Victim Witness Office and law enforcement to use in interviewing victims of child abuse and child sex crimes, a place where they can go and feel safe and tell their story. To me, that was a very important project. I got to work hand in hand with members of our community, members of the Rotary Club. It was built completely with volunteer money. It was built with volunteer labor. And I got to work hand in hand with very skilled contractors, as well as inmates who had been released on work furlough to come help with that program. And it was a time we all got together where normally we wouldn't hang out and associate together, but we really were dedicated to doing something that was very important to our future generation and the children. Volunteer and community services been something that's very important to me.
Bob?
Currently, I'm an Elks member in Lakeport, involved in that organization. Prior service to the community involved being very active in the Community to Restore Clear Lake, the Positive Image Committee of Clear Lake, and the Clear Lake Chamber of Commerce. Currently, as a private business person in Clear Lake, we donate funding to the schools for the children programs and also to some of the other worthy civic organizations in Clear Lake.
Sheriff Rivera?
Thank you. I'm impressed by the resume of volunteering. Must have a lot of time on their hands, but I work a lot as a sheriff, and that is my primary focus along with my family. So I spend the time that I have, and much of it is after hours, answering the call of the people when they have concerns, including the people of Lakeport and the people of Clear Lake. I get an inordinate amount of phone calls. My cell phone number is out there. I spend a lot of time in the office. I spend a lot of time out by management, by walking around, and management by driving around. I wish I had more time to volunteer for community services, but the truth is the rest of the time I spend it with my family and raising my young son to be a good and decent human being and a good citizen. And I believe that those two things, number one, are the most important to me, and number two, it's what's expected of me when you elected me as sheriff in 2010. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is for Bob. How has criminal justice realignment changed the business of law enforcement in California? And what will you do in response to the change in the law?
Well, it's dramatically increased the service areas for law enforcement throughout California and all counties. All counties have been drastically affected by the release of the prisoners back into the counties. Brian works at probation. He deals with a lot of those issues on AB 109. And how are we going to deal with it as far as the sheriff goes? The largest impact is going to be through the probation department for the county, but the sheriff is going to be greatly impacted in two areas. One in the patrol area, because the officers are going to be far busier with those released prisoners back committing crimes. And secondly, the overcrowding issue for the jail. And I do understand that there is a grant to increase the size of the jail and the bedding capacity of the jail, and that's going to be of paramount importance to get started immediately. The sheriff is going to have to direct their staff to allocate personnel as best possible to deal with the influx of crime that is going to come to Lake County. And I believe we've already seen a lot of that. The jail construction is going to be a long, long project. Anybody involved in the construction of a jail knows that this will probably take 4 to 5 years to complete. During that interim time, programs are going to need to be put into place so that the serious and violent offenders are not going to be released back onto the street when we bring in some of the other offenders. How is the sheriff going to do that? Well, I would submit that there's going to be programs, such as the home detention programs, that are going to be more utilized. We're going to have to track the offenders better. Of great importance is that the sheriff take a stand to ensure that even though the state says that they won't, the serious offenders, such as rape and child molest, do not come back into Lake County. As a police chief, we had what we called imports and exports. In other words, people could be paroled into Lake County from another jurisdiction and vice versa. We protested every time a parolee that was convicted of child molest was going to be sent back in to the city limits of Clear Lake, and were successful several times. That needs to be looked at heavily and done.
Sheriff Rivera?
The criminal justice realignment was something that I opposed from the moment I heard about it, which is in late 2010. It was implemented sometime around October, November of 2011. I was one of the few sheriffs in the state that opposed it. I saw it as a disaster, moving hardened criminals and releasing hardened criminals early from their sentences, sentencing people who are what they call the 3 nons, which is nonviolent, non-sexual, releasing these individuals or sentencing them to the county jail. When I took over, there were 170 people in the county jail. Last weekend we had 350, and that is difficult. And we are only licensed for 286. So what the state of California did was to get rid of 2 problems. The first problem was that they were under a consent decree for being overcrowded, something that had mushroomed over the years and nobody took a look at it. The second problem was the Correctional Officers Association had grown too powerful and their lobby was too powerful. So they made all that go away with the criminal justice realignment. But it's here, I've accepted it, and I've dealt with it. What it means to me is, again, the overcrowding of the jail and having to take care of medical issues that I never would have dreamed of as a county sheriff when I started in 2011. The amount of people there. And on the patrol side, the amount of hardened criminals that our deputies, many times alone with backup 20 or 30 minutes away, have to deal with. So we have to rethink how we manage the entire idea of law enforcement and the criminal justice system. I believe that people can be rehabilitated, but it takes a lot. There are proven methods of doing it, and we're implementing it. We hired a company that's known for success in this called BI, and BI has put a day reporting center together. They have put computer classes for training these individuals, and they have offered job training within the jail. We have the AODS, we have parenting classes, we have GED completions. But that's not going to be all that's needed. We need to rethink the way we deal with our criminals. But one thing we have not done here is release hardened criminals onto the street. We have a program for home detention with a bracelet, a GPS monitor. But you know, we turn down the vast majority of the people who apply because they either have violent records or they are an escape or likely to flee or for many other reasons. So we do the best we can to manage under very difficult circumstances. And I'll tell you something else. They had guaranteed funding up through 2014 when they first proposed this. Now they're talking about reducing the funding. You need to contact your legislators and tell them that won't work for you. Thank you.
I just want to give a quick elevator speech on what realignment is. It's not anything that any of us asked for. In 2011, the Supreme Court ordered the state of California to reduce its prison population due to overcrowding issues. We're now facing the same issue here in Lake County. We're absorbing the overcrowding issue. The sheriff says there's 350 people in a facility that's only licensed to hold 286. It's not going to be very long before the federal court comes in and puts that same type of cap on us. What it's incumbent upon on the local counties, what realignment did was shift the responsibility for dealing with people that were convicted of crimes from the state to the county and gave us that funding to deal with those types of things. Whether you like it or not, it's here. Some people agree with it, some people don't. Some people think that there are people that are going to get rehabilitated and not commit crimes. I personally think there are some out there too, but by and large, there's a lot of people that just are not going to be fixed, and we have to deal with them. My efforts in realignment at the probation department will continue as the sheriff. I will work, as I said earlier, in establishing relationships towards addressing this problem. The DRC that he spoke about, the Day Reporting Center, is established and run by the probation department. There's talk of a narcotics task force. There's no relationship that exists that we need to have in order to establish a realigned offender task force. This isn't simply a probation department problem. It's not simply a sheriff's department problem. It's something that we have to tackle as a community, as your elected representatives, as your appointed officials, as your sworn officers. We need to come up with solutions to this problem, and I plan to implement those solutions by forming a realigned offender task force, by working with probation, by working with mental health, drug and alcohol services, with employment counselors, with Workforce Lake, to find the solutions that we need to steer people away from criminality. We've had over 25 years of simply warehousing our criminals, sending people away for fairly minor crimes to prison and expecting that they're going to get better, only to find out that it's just a revolving door, that simple incarceration and warehousing doesn't work. Rehabilitation, or the realignment, is forcing us to rethink the way we deal with offenders, and I plan to continue doing that as your sheriff.
Okay, the next question is for Sheriff Rivera. What are the primary functions of the Lake County Sheriff? Now, how will you uphold those functions as the elected leader?
The first and foremost primary function is the jail. That's mandated. And other functions, I am also the coroner, so we investigate deaths that are suspicious. We also provide court security, so the bailiffs that you see in the court, if you have ever in court, those are people who are under my command. We have boat patrol. We have our civil division that serves restraining orders, all kinds of evictions, civil harassment orders. And our patrol division, obviously, which is a major part of my team in managing that. These are all important functions. You can't really say that one trumps the other. They all have to be incorporated into the bigger picture. When I said that I'm very busy, that gives you some idea. When you're wearing these many hats and when you're dealing with all these different issues, and you have to be careful with each and every one of them, make sure that you're making the right decision. You don't always make the right decision. Each and every one of us in this room are human, and we all made mistakes. There's nobody in here that doesn't make errors on occasion. But you try to do your best, and in doing your best, you have to reflect on these things. So, obviously, because of public safety, the two most important, or at least the ones that we focus on, are our patrol and our jail. We can't have prisoners escaping. We can't have riots in the jail. We can't have lawsuits from the jail. Writ of mandates from the jail from people accusing us of mistreating them. And by the way, those have gone down dramatically under my watch. We have fixed the jail problem in this county, and I'm proud of that. Our patrol staff, again, these numbers that I gave you are just a small sprinkling, and they continue on to 2013. 176 arrests in 2013 for sales or possession for sales of narcotics. Well, I won't bore you with the statistics that are here. If you want to look at them, these papers are outside also. But the sheriff is honestly one of the most important and one of the most powerful positions that in the United States, the sheriff is a constitutional officer. And in doing so, the sheriff controls many things that even legislators cannot control. The sheriff can, in fact, step in if the federal government wants to try to come here and take your weapons, for instance, a Second Amendment violation. The sheriff can stop that. It's important that you have a strong sheriff, a person who's tried and tested and the metal's there to do the job and to take on whatever needs to be taken on. Thank you.
Brian?
I think the sheriff outlined what the responsibilities are of the sheriff, running and maintaining the jail, providing courthouse security. It's not a function of the sheriff, it's a separate office, actually, the office of the coroner. We don't just investigate suspicious deaths. There's all kinds of criteria that go into the investigations of death in the county. And also the sheriff is involved in civil process. As the sheriff said, there are many hats out there, and we have a finite number of resources and staff available to us. And I think what people out here want to know is, what are you going to do as the candidate that's going to make things better? What I intend to do is reinstate the volunteer program. There was a lot of volunteers when I started working at the Sheriff's Department. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of 100. We had an extremely strong volunteer program, and these volunteers helped us out by serving papers, by serving eviction notices, by serving subpoenas, augmenting our patrol units and doing vacation checks on homes, being visible out in the community. Sometimes just having somebody drive around in a Crown Victoria at night, even if they weren't deputy sheriffs, would have a quelling effect on the crime because everybody thinks, oh, that must be the cops. I want to bring back those volunteers. A lot of those volunteers no longer volunteer at the Sheriff's Department, but they're still volunteering in our community. The volunteer program, to me, coming from a military background, I saw how effective our special forces units were in engaging other communities. You can drop in a team of special forces, 10 special forces soldiers, and train a community of 150 or 200 people. They're called force multipliers. I want to commit to have a deputy sheriff that's dedicated to running the volunteer program, somebody that can act as the liaison between our volunteer organization and the Sheriff's Department, so information can get put back and forth. Let's use our volunteer resources and tap into the people that are ready, willing, and able in our community to make our community a safer place for people to come, live, visit, and work. Thank you.
Thank you. They pretty much hit on most of the areas there. A lot of people aren't familiar with the sheriff's duties, that being that the sheriff's mandatory responsibility is to provide for civil actions, provide court security, and maintain a jail. There's nothing that mandates the sheriff to provide patrol and investigation services other than the community. So, how are you going to do that? First of all, the sheriff is not the person that is going to be out there performing each and every one of those functions. The sheriff must act as an oversight officer for that agency and assign proper and trained personnel to each one of those divisions that provide management on a daily basis to those divisions and bring back input to the sheriff for changes that may be needed. The sheriff has many responsibilities and duties. The sheriff in Lake County and many other counties is also the coroner, as was mentioned. The coroner's office, a separate office, as was mentioned, is still the duty of the sheriff. The investigation of many deaths in this county is a function that the sheriff provides. Remember, when you're electing a sheriff, you're electing a sheriff coroner, both at the same time. So the sheriff has many duties and cannot do them all himself. He must have the proper staff in place and the proper management and policies and procedures in his organization to carry that through. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is for Brian. Please describe the methods of communication you will utilize to communicate with the general public the activities of the Sheriff's Department. For example, newspaper, social media, etc.
Again, I'd like to take this opportunity not only to tell you what I will do, but what I have done. Many of you are familiar with the Nixle program at the Sheriff's Department. I didn't create that program, but I brought the program to the Sheriff's Department before I left. It was a program that's designed to communicate urgent public safety information to those who wish to receive it. It's designed to notify us of if there's a shooter in a particular neighborhood, or if there is a landslide or other emergency, notify us of road closures, or notify us of ongoing criminal operations. It wasn't intended to be the public information dissemination point that it has become. I do value the value of social media and internet technology, and I intend to implement programs such as Twitter. I intend to have a Facebook presence. I intend to modernize and update the Sheriff's Department webpage and have current ongoing information in there. I'd like to start holding actual press conferences where members of the media and members of the public can come and interact directly, one-on-one, with the sheriff or the press information officer. I'd like to change the policy that nobody is allowed to talk to the media except for a single person who is simply the mouthpiece of the sheriff. Every single deputy sheriff is a public servant out there, and every single deputy sheriff should be somewhat of a public information officer. The media should not show up at a crime scene and get the equivalent of the hand over the camera lens and say, nothing to see here, you'll be told about what's going on later. It just provides a little bit of training. It just requires a little bit of training for our deputy sheriffs to make them knowledgeable on what information is appropriate to disseminate, what information is proper to disseminate, and what information should be kept close to the vest and why. I intend to have open lines of communication with members of the media and members of the public. I intend to not exclude any particular media group, and it's all about openness and transparency. The freedom of the press is probably the most American thing that we have in this country. Our country was founded on a principle that we're fearful of a tyrannical and oppressive and overpowerful government. And the freedom of the press is what gives each and every one of you out there the cumulative voice to be heard, the cumulative voice to hold your elected officials responsible and accountable. And we need to have that openness and transparency that we hear so often about.
Well, today, it seems to be that the electronic media is the fastest and easiest source to use. But I have to tell you that I'm a little bit old-fashioned. I still believe in the concept that the sheriff should set certain hours that he will be available for people to come to the office and talk to him one-on-one. I also believe that the sheriff should make himself available at given times at the substations throughout the county so that people from those areas could go to the substation and the sheriff would be available there to talk to them. I will tell you what I did as a police chief. I held office hours that the public knew that I would be there. If you look back in my time, I very, very rarely took a lunch break between 12 and 1 o'clock because that was the time that a working person had their lunch break and they could come talk to me. The other important thing that you must remember, a lot of the elderly people are not able to get out of their homes and come talk to the sheriff, nor are they very electronically inclined. But they too are people, just like we are. I made appointments with those people that could not come in to talk to me, where I would literally go to their house and sit down and talk to them. I believe that that is important even today.
Sheriff Rivera.
Thank you. I make myself personally available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, by cell phone to anybody who calls me. I always return my calls, and I always answer the people's questions, no matter what. That's first and foremost. As far as releasing information, we implemented, even though it was bought at a great expense for this office 4 years before I took office, a system called Lexipol, which is the best practices in law enforcement, its goal is to have consistency in law enforcement, to have it implemented throughout the United States so that you don't have one type of law enforcement in one city and a different type of law enforcement in another city, which follows the law and case law and monitors what is the shifting sands, which is the law, to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And that Lexipol policy has Nixle as our press release vehicle, and that's what we use. And we write a lot of press releases. If you look back 3.5 years ago and see how many press releases were being released, we do press releases almost daily without exclusion. And we're keeping the public informed. And I've heard talk out there, oh, that's bad for tourism, it's bad for this, it's bad for that. Well, the truth is that the truth is the truth. And if we're arresting people because they're committing crimes, the public has a right and a need to know, and we put that out there. Our web page is updated. We update it every day with the press releases. They're added. If you go to our webpage right now, you would see the latest press release that was released today will be up there. I do a radio show every 2 weeks. I take unscripted calls from people. They're not screened at all. I want to talk to the folks. I spend an hour every 2 weeks. It's a show that's on KPFC, Straight Talk with the Sheriff. And I field those calls, and I make myself available in a way that, as far as I know, no other sheriff in the United States of America does. I don't know of any other sheriff that has a radio show every 2 weeks that takes unscripted calls, and I see many people in this audience that have called me, and also has their personal cell phone number available for people to call at any time, day or night. I received a call, I don't know, a week or so ago, 10 o'clock at night from the record beat. You know what? I answered the phone. I received calls from people in distress, even matters that aren't really law enforcement or they're outside of my jurisdiction. I try to help. And my communication, honestly, has been about as good as it's going to get. Thank you.
Okay, the next question is for Bob. And at this point, we're getting close to wrapping things up. So we've integrated one of the questions that came in today, and I would like to move and just focus on questions that came in today. Lots of great questions, so I thank everybody for submitting. The next question for Bob is, please describe the challenges and possible opportunities associated with the state legislation of medical marijuana and the county's ordinance on this matter.
Boy, I sure hope this doesn't go up in smoke. What are the challenges of medical marijuana? Well, I think first we have to look at whether or not the medical marijuana is being properly utilized as it was intended to be. Prop 215 is not utilized the way it was. That was a guise so that people could get their marijuana cards that were not in a medical need. So where are we at today? Well, folks, marijuana is legal in California. We can forget Prop 215. All you have to do is go to a doctor, probably in Upper Lake, and say that your underwear are tight, and marijuana might help you. Are you going to tell me that marijuana is not legal because you're going to walk away from there with a marijuana card and it's going to make it perfectly legal? Where are we going to go? With respect to the ordinances, it's a very difficult decision. I'm going to tell you that I have a different view than I used to have. I'm going to tell you something that I never thought that I would ever say in my life. From a personal perspective, I oppose marijuana. But that's not the job of the sheriff. The job of the sheriff is to serve the best interest of the people and the best interest of the country. Marijuana is going to be legalized within 2 to 4 years. We've already seen some states moving in that direction. We know that it's not for medical purposes. Does it serve a medical purpose? Maybe 2% of the people using marijuana are using it for a valid medical purpose. Here we go. And I wish I never had to say this. It is time that on a national basis, that marijuana is legalized, that it is commercially grown, commercially processed, commercially distributed, and commercially sold and taxed. That is the only way that we're going to get it out of our backyards, is to get it commercially done and taxed. Let's use that tax money to fight the methamphetamine problems and the enforcement of the marijuana. I'm out of time.
Sheriff Rivera?
I have said from before the time that I took office that I believe that marijuana in general should be legalized. The prohibition is just not working. It's causing more harm and more crime than anything else. The problem that you have is that it's not expedient for the federal government to do so. There's too much money involved for lawyers, for judges, for the court system, for the jails, for law enforcement, to let such a cash cow go away, but it's harming the people. When Proposition 215 and the Compassionate Care Act was passed, that was a decent attempt by decent people like you out there in the audience to acknowledge that there is a legitimate medical use for marijuana, and that to stop someone suffering, we must take that into account and have rules that allow for that. The problem has been that organized crime and drug traffickers saw an enormous opportunity there. They saw the opportunity to hijack the will of the people, to hijack your will, and thereby blur the lines of what is legal and what is not legal. That has been one of the most challenging things that I have dealt with since I've been sheriff. And when I took this office, I would have never imagined that, but it's the truth. Because you get an ordinance and one side doesn't like it, the other side doesn't like it, so that it gets implemented for a little bit, and then nobody likes it. The truth of the matter is that I support Measure N for this reason. We need controls, or else it's going to be a free-for-all. This will be the Wild West here. We already have, if you've ever flown this county, you would be shocked to see how much marijuana is growing in this county. That needs to stop. And we have taken it on full blast. There's been many, many rumors that I go in some poor sick patient's backyard and rip out 6 plants. That is a lie. Okay, I don't have the assets, I don't have the resources, nor do I have the ability to do that, nor do I want to do that. But I can tell you this. We seized 160,792 illegal marijuana plants last year, 4,800 pounds of illegal processed marijuana, and 141 illegal grows eradicated. That's the truth. I have never gone after a medical marijuana patient because, frankly, I'd do anything if my family needed medicine, and I expect the same from any one of you out there. If it's legitimate, let it be. If it's illegal, don't.
Brian?
The question question of marijuana comes up no matter where I go, and I'm always thankful that I'm not running for the Board of Supervisors and have to be the person that's responsible for coming up with some ordinance that enough people will be happy with, because I don't know, I've yet to see such an ordinance. And the problem that comes along with marijuana, I think we all pretty much agree, it isn't marijuana itself. In my over 20 years of law enforcement, I've seen people drink themselves to death, overdose on cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, prescription pills, everything else. I've never seen anybody get stoned to death. It's not the marijuana that's the problem. It's because marijuana is so profitable. Anytime that you have profit, you have greed. Anytime you have greed, you have violence. And we really need to come up with smart ways to address those problems in our community. I have campaigned a long time on the premise that my deputy sheriffs are going to have 5 areas of focus when it comes to enforcing whatever marijuana laws are in the books. If you completely legalized it, we'd have problems. If you completely banned all cultivation, we'd have problems. Bottom line is, at the end of the day, we're going to have problems to deal with as far as marijuana goes in our community. And my 5 points are that we're going to go after commercial, large-scale growing operations. Anybody that needs it, and there are people that do reap medical benefits from marijuana. It's been shown. Sanjay Gupta came out and said, yeah, I agree that people receive medical benefits from the cannabinoids in marijuana. I can't argue with Sanjay. He's been in school a lot longer than me. So people that do need to have access to medical marijuana should be protected, and those aren't the people that are outgrowing large-scale commercial quantities of the product. People that grow on public lands. The sheriff said he took out 180 some odd thousand plants, I think. During the years that I was on the camp team at the Sheriff's Department, there was a year we took over 300,000. There was a year we took over 500,000 plants, mainly off our public lands. Those public lands, the BLM land, the United States forest lands, those are your backyard, that's my backyard. I grew up hunting, camping, hiking, doing all those things out there, and I want to be able to go out there and enjoy it again without looking at these horrible marijuana growing operations where there's hundreds and hundreds of miles of drip line, illegal fertilizers, trash, debris, poisoned animals. I want to focus on getting our public lands back. I want to focus on people that trespass on other people's private property. I want to focus on illegal growing operations where people trespass on the private property of others. There's a lot of us out that are in this community. Not all of us are fortunate enough to have a large piece of property or a lot of properties, but those of us that do expect to be able to enjoy our property. So people that trespass on others' private property expect enforcement. Environmental damage to our forests, as I outlined, and environmental damage to our communities when people come in and gut homes and reduce the property values of neighborhoods and draw crime. And finally, and it's very important with the upcoming drought issues we have, anybody that diverts natural waterways or steals water is going to be subject to enforcement actions. And those are going to be very specific guidelines that are going to be put forth to my staff.
And we have a rebuttal from Sheriff Rivera.
It's not so much a rebuttal as a point of clarification. I made a very conscious decision to increase the amount of deputies that are in the Narcotics Task Force and specifically increase the amount of deputies that work marijuana. I also made a conscious decision to target our own backyard. It's not that I don't value the use of public lands. I do, and I understand its value, believe me. When you're talking about the 300,000 or 500,000 that was done in the previous administration, that was just cut and go from public land. But how about our own backyards? Isn't the way to properly address this to deal with these monstrous grows that are right here in Lake County, right next to you, your neighbors? We had 4 in one night armed home invasion robberies during the growth season. Those didn't happen in the federal force. They happened right here in your neighborhood. I made that decision and I stand by it. I believe the federal government needs to step up to the plate a whole lot more than they do for the federal force, but I don't believe that we need to absorb that obligation to the point that we ignore our own troubles. Thank you.
Any response? Okay, we're getting close to the closing statement, so I'm going to throw a little bit of a curveball to see if the candidates are up for it. For one more question, 1 minute each, if Wendy can check just put the red flag up. This is, please provide your position on concealed carry permits. And we'll start with Sheriff Rivera.
My position is very simple. If you're a law-abiding citizen, you should have a CCW. End of story. And I'll tell you that the numbers prove what I'm saying. When I took office, there was 301 concealed weapons permits issued, and at this point, there's 460, 70, depending on whether you count the last class that just needs to take their range. And the reason I believe that is we are Americans, and we are responsible people, and if you are a responsible individual, then you should be allowed to defend yourself. And I believe that that is particularly important in a rural county like this, where cell phone service is spotty, where many times we're traveling in areas where cars don't go by for hours, and there is a need for that. I took away all the other prerequisites that the previous administration had for these, like the letters from their friends, the using it as a political tool, using it as a campaign to get sponsorship. I got rid of all of that. All you need to do is go on my website, download the basic Department of Justice, or on the county's website, the sheriff's website, download the county's or the state's Department of Justice application, and have your fingerprints taken. They will either, the DOJ will either say you can possess a gun or not. If you can possess a gun, you can complete the program by taking the class. Thank you.
Try to keep it to a minute. A well-armed, law-abiding, responsible population will make bad people think long and hard before trying to victimize you. Every person that's legally allowed to possess a firearm in Lake County should have a CCW permit if they decide to do so. I'll echo the sheriff's sentiments in that we are a very rural county. Sometimes law enforcement response is much farther away than we like, and self-protection is not only a constitutional right, to me it's a basic human right. You should be able to protect yourself in your home, when you're out and about. I want to implement programs that teach our CCW holders how to safely handle firearms, how to effectively use them, when they can use them, and most importantly, when they shouldn't use them. I want people to be out there with the ability to protect themselves and not go out there and be a vigilante group.
Bob?
Pretty simple question here. As a police chief for 14 years, I did issue concealed weapon permits. I think that there's a lot of people that may be familiar with the latest Ninth Circuit Court's decision as far as the due cause, saying that you can no longer use due cause. I do believe that's going to be appealed, so let's not put a lot of weight into that. I could also go in and tell you that only two of the three conservative judges on the circuit court were the panelists on that, and it was a 2-to-1 decision, so let's not hold our breath on that. But let's just consider that self-protection is due clause in itself. I do not agree that anybody that is legally entitled to have a firearm should be issued a concealed weapon permit, only because I think we need to look at the moral issue involved in that. A person may be legally entitled to have a firearm and a concealed weapon permit. However, they may have been involved in domestic disputes within a recent period of time, and I think that moral issue needs to be considered in issuing that permit.
Thank you. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the debate. Again, I want to thank everyone for all the questions. There was really a lot of questions that came in prior to this debate, and we had a lot of questions come in just before the debate. I'm sure each candidate would be happy to meet with or answer further questions that were not able to be presented today to keep within the 2-hour time frame. So with that being said, we're going to go to the closing statements, and the first person to present the closing statement is Bob.
You're going to be confronted with tough decisions. I can tell you, you have 3 candidates to choose from. You're going to make a decision. If you want the sheriff's office to continue the way that it is, the decision is easy. The current sheriff would be elected. If you want a change in the department, you have 2 options, either Brian or myself. You're going to make that decision. But I ask, what is the best decision going to be? What are you going to base that decision on? Yes, Brian and I have some similarities, but we have some differences. The qualification and experience is the primary difference between Brian and I. I have much more experience, much more qualifications, and have actually performed the similar job as being your sheriff for a long period of time. I know the challenges that are going to occur. It's a very steep learning curve to get to be the sheriff. But as sheriff, we have to set goals. We must improve the image of the Sheriff's Department and Lake County. The past two sheriffs have been elected from within. Both have been plagued by controversy. That hasn't been very well for Lake County. That has not only been plagued within Lake County, it has been plagued beyond Lake County. This is your opportunity to elect a sheriff from outside an outside county government. Just think, there could be a change. There could be new and innovative ideas that were brought from the outside. We talked about technology early. Those things were done a long, long time ago through my administration. There would be no favoritism. There would be no beholding to anyone. I am not employed within county government. I have no favorites. There would be no fears of retaliation by any employees. We would just start with a good, clean slate. Let's not decide this election based on emotional pleas or friendships, but upon facts. The fact is, I am the most qualified, most experienced candidate with a track record to back it up. After careful consideration of all three candidates, I ask for your vote.
Okay, the next for the closing statement is Sheriff Rivero.
First, I'd like to thank everyone here for being here and taking the time to listen to us. This is really important. This is really democracy at work, and I really appreciate the fact that this is going out to other people through television and radio. I'm grateful for everyone that's carrying this so that people can view this in the comfort of their own homes. I am running on the record that I created in the last 3.5 years, the record of tough but just law enforcement, the record of even and equal and decent treatment to each and every citizen that we contact, the record of taking on this challenge that is AB 109. It really is a challenge, and succeeding. Being able to control the crime, being able to control the jail, implementing the things that are necessary by providing leadership to good people and direction to good people to do the job properly for you. You do have choices, and I respect your choice. I respect the will of the people, and this is about the will of the people. You may have come in here with a preconceived idea and have a different idea just from being here. And that's part of the process. It really is. But when you look at what I said in 2010, that I would take on the narcotics problem here in Lake County, we had 21 meth arrests in the last 2 weeks alone. That I would take on the issues of the parolees and the sex registrants, and they're no longer parolees, they're called early release individuals. And the fact that despite AB 109 and the early release, that we're still making headway. We're heading in the right direction. Your deputies are doing a terrific job. And they do have good morale. They really do. Sir Martin agreed with me on that just the other day. Their morale is good, but they do need to be rewarded in order for us to keep those good deputies. I ask you to take the information home and just ponder what was said here. And then do your research. Don't just believe a blog or even the mainstream media. Understand that there's always more to the story than maybe you are reading. And do your homework. Become educated. I ask for you to re-elect me as sheriff, and I respect your decision. Thank you very much for being here tonight, and God bless.
And our final closing statements from Brian.
In addition to thanking everyone here and at home that's listening, I want to thank my opponents because this takes a lot to run a campaign. It takes a lot of time and energy, and nobody, this is all voluntary. Nobody forced any of us into it. So I want to take the time to thank my opponents and make a commitment that whoever's elected will get the support of the ones that aren't in their efforts. Now my closing speech, my sales pitch. I heard Mr. Chalk talk about he has more experience, and I want to tell you that more time doesn't necessarily mean more experience. If you had to go, you or a loved one had to go see a heart surgeon, you have to ask yourself, do I want a heart surgeon that practiced medicine for 32 years but had been out of the game for the last 8 years, or do you want a heart surgeon that's been involved constantly for the last 22 years and is up to date on modern enforcement, modern practices, and modern technology? I'm the only candidate with military experience. I'm the only military veteran that volunteered to serve his country when the time came to call. I'm the only candidate with a Bachelor of Science degree. The advanced education required that's very specific to the job of the sheriff. Bachelor of Science degree in Public Administration. I want to take the time to ask you, who do you want to represent the sheriff, the office of the sheriff, and you in law enforcement in Lake County into the future?